Yeah, hi. Okay, this book is called The Smartest Giant in Town. Now, this here is a giant, and his name is George. And George is so big. Now, George is sad because George has old clothes, and George wants new clothes. So George goes walking along the road, and then George comes to a shop. But George's head is so big, George cannot go into the shop. So George buys a shirt, trousers, a belt, socks, shoes and a tie. And then George goes out of the shop. And George leaves his old clothes in the shop. Now, outside on the pavement, George meets a giraffe. Oh, and the giraffe is sad. And George says, "Oh, giraffe, what's the matter?" And the giraffe says, "Blah, blah, 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 blah. I am cold, I am cold." He says, "My neck is cold." So what can George give the giraffe? Do you know? Yes, George gives the giraffe his tie, and the giraffe puts the tie round and round and round his neck. And the giraffe says, "Thank you, George. Thank you for the tie." And now the giraffe is happy, and George is happy because he helped the giraffe. So George goes walking down the road, and George goes into a park. Now, in the park is a river, and on the river is a boat, and on the boat is a little goat. Oh, and the goat is sad. And George says, "Goat, goat, what's the matter?" And the goat says, "Oh, it was rainy and windy and stormy, and look, I have no more sail. My sail is gone." So what can George give the goat? Do you know? Yes, George gives the goat his shirt. And now the goat has a sail for his boat, and the goat is happy. And George goes walking through the park. Oh, and then George meets a family of mice. This is the mummy mouse and her babies. Oh, and they are sad. And George says, "Oh, what's the matter?" And the mice say, "Oh, we have no more house. There was a fire in the house and smoke, and now look, our house is burnt." So what can George give the mice? Do you know? Yes, George gives the mice his shoe because George has so big shoes. Right? And the mice are happy. Now they have a new house. And George now has only one shoe. So George cannot walk. George has to hop through the park. And then George meets a fox. Oh, and the fox is sad. No? The fox is standing outside his tent. Oh, and George says, "Fox, what's the matter?" And the fox says, "Look, I was walking in the rain. It was raining. And then my sleeping bag went splash into a puddle. And now my sleeping bag is wet. I have no bed." So what can George give the fox? Do you know? Yes, George gives the fox his sock. Oh, and now the fox is happy. And now the fox can sleep in George's sock. And George is happy because he helped all the animals. So George now, got only one shoe and one sock. So he goes hop through the park. And then George meets a dog. Oh, and the dog is sad. The dog's going, oh, and George says, "Dog, what's the matter?" Oh, and the dog says, "Oh, I cannot walk. It's so muddy." So what can George give the dog? to walk over the mud. Do you know? Yes. George gives the dog his belt, and now the dog can walk over his belt, you see? And George goes hopping, hopping, hopping along. And George is happy. He helped the giraffe. He helped the goat. He helped the mice, the fox, and the dog. Oh dear, but oh dear now, poor George. He's walking along and suddenly George's trousers fall down. And now you can see his pants and his vest because George has no belt. And George says, I am cold, says George. Yeah, so George is sad. And George says, I can go back to the shop. But when George gets to the shop, the door is closed. So George sits down, and now George is sad because he's so cold. And suddenly George sees a bag, and in the bag are George's old clothes. So George puts on his dress, and he puts on his sandals, and then he says, I'm going back to my house. And when George gets back, there are all the animals that help George, and they have a present for George. It's a crown. And all the animals have written a letter. This is a letter. And the giraffe says, thank you for the tie. The goat says, thank you for the shirt. The mouse says, thank you for the shoe. The fox says, thank you for the sock. And the dog says, thank you for the belt. And they all say, George, you are the best giant in town.